The universe was not quiet. It only seemed that way to those who never listened long enough. For those who knew how to listen, who understood that silence was only the skin stretched over something deeper, the universe whispered of loss, of ruins, of things forgotten. And somewhere far beyond the reach of any map, in a corner of space untouched for eons, something ancient stirred. The first signal was faint, too faint to be natural, too structured to be random. Humanity's deep space arrays caught it in the middle of an otherwise ordinary night, just a flicker of sound across an ocean of static. It should have been dismissed. It should have been noise. But it wasn't. The signature was old. Too old. Older than humanity's first sparks of civilization. Older than the first words carved into stone. A voice from before memory itself. At first no one believed it. Scientists argued, governments delayed, the military grew restless. But when the data was cleaned, when the last distortion was stripped away, there was no more room for doubt. The signal was deliberate. It was calling out. And it wasn't human. Humanity had always looked up at the stars with a mixture of wonder and fear. Wonder for what could be out there. Fear for what could already be watching. But this time it wasn't humanity that was watching. It was something lost to time, reaching out in desperation, calling across a gulf so vast that even light struggled to carry the message. And humanity answered. A single expedition was authorized, a vessel built not for war but for discovery. Yet in its heart, every soul aboard carried a silent weight, the knowledge that they might not return. The ship left Earth with more questions than certainty. Was this signal a cry for help? A warning? A trap? Or something else entirely, something even the brightest minds had no words for? They traveled for weeks, then months. Past colonies, past the edges of known space, past even the old charts that starfarers swore by. Each day the signal grew clearer. It wasn't just sound anymore. Fragments of imagery broke through. Shapes. Symbols. The haunting impression of a people who once were reaching forward through centuries of dust and silence. For the crew, sleep became difficult. Some dreamed of voices they had never heard, faces they had never seen. Others awoke in cold sweat, convinced the signal wasn't simply being broadcast, it was listening back. When they finally arrived, nothing prepared them for what they saw. A world hung in the void, scarred and cracked like the remains of a shattered jewel. Its surface was burned, oceans long boiled away, cities reduced to bone-dry silhouettes against rust-colored ground. And yet, beneath the ruin, the signal pulsed like a heartbeat. The planet was dead. But something on it was not. Landing was dangerous. The atmosphere was unstable, the ground riddled with fissures. Yet the crew pressed on. Humanity had never been known for turning back when fear whispered in their ears. The ruins told their own story. Towering structures leaned against one another like broken teeth. Vast avenues stretched across desolation, leading nowhere. The air smelled faintly of ash, though no fires burned. Time itself had hollowed the world but not erased it. At the center of the largest ruin, buried beneath stone and collapsed metal, they found it. A chamber sealed so tightly that even millennia had not fully claimed it. Inside, the air was stale but breathable, preserved by forgotten machines still humming faintly, powered by reserves that should have long since failed. And there, suspended in glass, surrounded by dying lights, they found them. The first figure was humanoid, though not human. Taller, thinner, features etched in ways that seemed both alien and strangely familiar. Its chest rose in shallow, trembling movements. Not dead. Not fully alive. Something in between. There were more. Dozens of them. A people once lost to time itself, preserved in fragile silence. Waiting. The crew stood in stunned quiet. All their training, all their science, none of it had prepared them for this moment. They were not simply explorers anymore. They were witnesses to something ancient, something that had endured through ruin and extinction, calling out across the dark in hope that someone, anyone, would listen. And humanity had listened. But hope is not simple. Nor is survival. The first signs of movement came when the machines around the chamber faltered. Lights flickered. A low hum rose from the walls, shaking dust loose. The preserved figures stirred faintly, their faces twitching as though caught in dreams too heavy to escape. One of them opened its eyes. For a heartbeat, the crew froze. The gaze was not human, yet in it burned something undeniably alive. Something pleading. Something afraid. The being tried to speak, but the sound came out broken, like fragments of a forgotten language. The words didn't matter. The emotion did. Desperation. A plea. A need so raw it made the crew's hearts ache. Humanity had always wondered what it would mean to meet another intelligent species. Would it bring war? Knowledge? fear. What they faced now was something different. Not a conqueror. Not a rival. But a people on the edge of vanishing, clinging to life through the echo of a message sent across eternity. The decision weighed on them all. Help could mean salvation, or it could mean awakening something the universe itself had chosen to bury. Yet turning away would mean condemning an entire species to be forgotten forever. The silence stretched. Machines groaned. Dust fell in thin streams from the ceiling. The aliens' eyes locked onto them, unblinking, filled with the quiet terror of someone aware that they were seconds away from slipping back into oblivion. And then, the chamber shook. It was faint at first, just a tremor underfoot. But then the ground cracked. The walls rattled. Systems screamed to life that had been dormant for ages. Something vast and unseen awakened within the planet itself, something deeper than the ruins, deeper than the chamber, deeper than the ones who had been found. The crew exchanged terrified glances. Whatever had been preserved here was not alone. The signal had not just been a call for help. It was something else. Something bigger. Something waiting. And as the lights above flared bright for the first time in countless years, the truth hit them all at once. They had not simply discovered a people lost to time. They had awakened something that time itself had tried to bury. And now, it was too late to turn back. The tremor did not stop. Dust rained from the ceiling as the floor shifted beneath their boots, the sound of strained metal echoing through the chamber. The machines lining the walls, ancient and fragile, sputtered to life in uneven bursts of light, as if the entire place was suddenly remembering it was supposed to be alive. The crew backed away, unsure whether to flee or stay. Their leader raised a hand, steadying the others even though his own heart hammered hard in his chest. The aliens' eyes were still open, fixed on them with such intensity it felt as if the weight of centuries pressed into that gaze. One of the crew whispered, barely audible, "What have we done?" The question was not answered. It didn't need to be. Everyone felt it. They hadn't simply uncovered something lost, they had disturbed it. Still, no one moved toward the exit. Humanity had always carried a curse and a blessing, the inability to walk away from the unknown. Curiosity had driven them out of caves, across oceans into the skies and finally across the stars. And now, standing in front of a being that had survived extinction itself, that same unrelenting need to understand kept them rooted in place. The alien made another sound, a broken pattern of syllables that none of them could make sense of. But they didn't need translation to hear the desperation in it. The voice cracked with a strain that was painfully human, even though the form before them was anything but. The medic stepped forward, hesitant but resolute. Her gloved hand brushed the glass of the stasis chamber, searching for a way to stabilize the failing systems. The machinery responded with a faint hum, lights rippling weakly along its surface, but it was clear the technology was collapsing. If they did nothing, this being would die. Every second stretched. Each heartbeat was a countdown. The leader finally spoke, his voice low and steady though every nerve in him screamed for answers. "We can't let them die. Not after everything. Not after all this time." But helping wasn't simple. The alien machines were older than Earth itself. To touch them was to risk breaking what little still functioned. To leave them untouched was to condemn the beings inside to a second, final death. The crew argued in hushed tones, fear laced into every word. Some wanted to retreat, to wait until the quakes ended, to call back for guidance. Others argued that they had already come too far. They hadn't crossed half a galaxy just to turn their backs. The medic pressed her hand to the glass again, and this time the alien inside mirrored the motion. Palm to palm, separated only by the barrier, the connection was undeniable. Their eyes met. For a moment, the ruins, the tremors, the threat of collapse, all of it faded. Here was a being who had lived, laughed, built cities, dreamed of a future. A being who had seen their world fall apart and still sent a cry into the stars, hoping someone would hear it. And humanity had heard. The background of the signal, the long months of decoding, all rushed back in that moment. At first, the message had seemed almost random. Then, as fragments fell into place, they realized it wasn't noise, it was a memory. Pieces of culture, of history, of voices layered over one another. The alien people hadn't just been calling for help. They had been leaving behind themselves, a record carried on waves of sound through endless night. What haunted the crew most was how familiar it had felt. Not in the language or the symbols but in the intent. It was the same thing humanity had done, countless times across their own history. Cave paintings, stories etched in stone, songs sung into the dark. Always the same plea, remember us. Do not let us vanish. That was why they had come. Not just because of duty but because they recognized something in the message that was deeply human. The tremors grew stronger. Somewhere above, something massive shifted with a grinding roar. The chamber lights flashed, alarms and a forgotten tongue screamed from broken panels. Whatever was buried in this world was stirring, and it was bigger than anything the crew could imagine. One of the younger crew members backed toward the exit, panic written across his face. "This place is coming down. We need to get out before we're buried." The leader turned sharply. "Not without them." The words landed like a hammer. Humanity had always been stubborn, reckless, sometimes foolishly so, but never heartless. To abandon these beings now, after centuries of waiting, would be to betray the very reason they came. The medic worked quickly, tracing faint symbols on the console with trembling fingers. Some responded, flickering faintly, but most were dead. Every system fought against her touch, as if refusing to wake. Another sound filled the chamber. Not from the machines this time, but from deep within the planet itself. A low, rising rumble that made the ground quiver and the air feel heavy. The alien in the glass thrashed weakly, eyes wide with terror. It wasn't just dying, it was afraid of something else. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. This was a rescue, then who, or what, were they rescuing them from? The leader's thoughts spun. The ruins, the devastation on the surface, the silence stretching across centuries. It didn't look like a civilization that had simply collapsed under its own weight. It looked like a war had been fought here and lost. The quake intensified. Cracks split the walls, black dust spilling from the fractures. The alien raised its trembling hand again, pressing it hard against the glass as if begging them to hurry. The leader stepped forward, voice firm now, the weight of a choice pressing against every word. "Do it. Whatever you can. Get them out." The medic nodded, though fear was etched across her face. She worked furiously, splicing human tools into alien machines, forcing a connection where none should exist. Sparks flew, systems groaned, and suddenly the glass began to dissolve with a hiss of vapor. The alien gasped, its chest heaving violently as air rushed into lungs that had been still for centuries. The sound was ragged, raw, alive. For a heartbeat, triumph flared in the crew. Against all odds, against time itself, they had pulled life back from the edge. And then the ground split open. A deafening roar surged from below, shaking the chamber with a force that nearly threw them to the floor. A wind, hot and dry, burst from the cracks, carrying with it the stench of something ancient and foul. The alien, still coughing, turned its head toward the sound, its eyes wide with a fear that froze every human heart. This was not just the awakening of a people preserved. It was the awakening of something else entirely. The ruins above, the planet's scars, the desperate signal sent across the stars, it all began to piece together in their minds. This world had not been lost by accident. It had been destroyed. And what they had just stirred might not have been meant to rise again. The leader's voice broke the silence, hoarse but steady. "Everyone get ready. Whatever's down here, we're not alone with it anymore." The chamber lights flared to their brightest, casting long, sharp shadows against the walls. The air trembled with a deep, unrelenting hum, as though the entire planet was inhaling. And then came the sound, low, guttural, ancient. Not a machine. Not an echo. Something alive, something vast, something that had waited in the dark far longer than the beings in the glass. The alien beside them whispered something, words broken and cracked, but the meaning didn't need translation. The terror in its voice was enough. The crew had come to save a people lost to time. But now they feared they had also awakened what time itself had tried to bury. The roar did not fade. It grew, rising from the cracks below like the sound of a beast breathing in the dark, a sound too deep to be natural and too steady to be accidental. The crew froze in place, their hearts pounding as the air grew hotter and heavier, pressing down on them with invisible weight. Every instinct screamed to run, yet their feet refused to move. The alien they had freed staggered forward, its frail body shaking, eyes wide with terror. It pointed toward the fissures with trembling hands, repeating a broken phrase again and again. The words were not human, but the meaning was clear. "It's waking." The leader tried to steady his voice, though fear clung to every word. "Stay focused. We don't know what's coming, but we can't panic. We have to move together." Easier said than done. The ground shuddered violently, throwing one of the younger crew to the floor. Panels ripped free from the walls, sparks raining down, filling the chamber with the acrid stench of burning metal. Somewhere far above, a thunderous crash echoed through the ruins, as if entire towers were toppling into the abyss. The alien clutched at the medic's sleeve, its thin fingers digging desperately into the fabric. Its eyes shone with tears, its voice a broken whisper. Though the words meant nothing, the sound was unmistakable, pleading. begging them not to leave it behind. And still the roar grew louder. The crew began retreating toward the exit, but the alien resisted, pulling them back toward the row of sealed chambers where more of its people lay trapped in failing stasis. Their silhouettes glowed faintly within the fractured glass, bodies twitching weakly as systems failed one after another. The medic's heart clenched. She looked at the leader, her voice cracking. "We can't just leave them. Look at them, they're alive. They'll die if we walk away." The leader's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. He also knew that every second they lingered, the danger clawing up from below grew closer. Survival screamed at him to run. Humanity whispered at him to stay. The tremors grew violent, chunks of the ceiling crashing down, sending echoes through the chamber. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. Through the haze, the alien voices, weak, fractured, fading, rose in a chorus of desperate sound. It was no longer just one being begging for life. It was dozens. Hundreds. A people lost to time, crying out as the planet shook beneath them. The leader felt the weight of every decision pressing onto his chest. They had come all this way, crossed the galaxy because humanity refused to let silence win. And now silence threatened to claim these beings once more, right in front of their eyes. The roar from below sharpened, splitting into multiple tones, like voices, but impossibly deep, resonating through the stone and metal as though the planet itself was speaking. The alien's eyes widened further, pure terror radiating from its face. It clutched at its chest, whispering a word over and over. The translation didn't matter. What mattered was the fear. Whatever was beneath them, it was not a savior. It was the reason this world had died. The crew's panic broke into arguments. Some shouted that they had to flee before the entire structure collapsed. Others insisted they had to try to save more of the aliens before the chance was lost forever. Their voices clashed against the roar, filling the chamber with chaos. The leader raised his voice above them all. "Listen to me. We don't have time to fight each other. We need to choose now, save who we can or run before it's too late." The words hung heavy, echoing into the quake-ridden silence. The alien tugged at the medic again, pulling her toward the stasis chambers. She stared into its pleading eyes, her breath shaking. "If it were us," she whispered almost too softly to hear, "wouldn't we hope someone would stay?" The leader met her gaze, torn apart inside. He saw the same thought in every face around him. Humanity had always defined itself not by power, but by stubborn compassion. The refusal to look away from suffering no matter the risk. But the sound from below left no illusions. The enemy that had destroyed this world was not gone. It was here waiting, rising. The chamber floor cracked wide open with a thunderous snap, splitting across the room like lightning frozen into stone. Heat poured upward, a suffocating wave that seared their lungs. From the black fissure below came movement, shadows too vast to belong to anything natural. The lights above flickered wildly, casting broken images across the walls. The alien staggered back, its body shaking with fear, its eyes locked on the abyss. For the first time the leader realized, it wasn't just afraid of death. It was afraid of what was waking. The sound came again, louder than ever, a guttural cry that rattled their bones. It was no machine, no storm, no trick of echoes. It was alive. Alive and ancient, something that had buried this world in fire and ruin long before humanity had even learned to walk upright. The crew clutched their weapons, though every one of them knew they were useless against whatever stirred below. Sweat rolled down their faces, their breaths ragged, hearts hammering as the ground shook harder and harder. The alien clung to the medic's arm, tears streaking its dirt-stained cheeks, its broken words spilling out in rapid streams. The medic couldn't understand, but she didn't need to. The fear in its voice was enough to hollow her chest. The leader looked at his crew, then at the alien, then at the abyss yawning wider beneath their feet. The walls groaned, the ceiling cracked, and the roar reached its peak, an endless thunder that promised destruction. There was no more time. Every instinct screamed that the next moment would decide everything, whether humanity would be remembered as the ones who saved a people lost to time, or the ones who unleashed something that should have stayed buried. The chamber shook violently, fissures racing across the floor, lights bursting in showers of sparks. The abyss below boiled with unseen movement, shadows clawing up the walls. The roar became a scream, echoing through the ruins with earth-shattering force. The alien clutched tighter, its eyes begging for an answer, for salvation, for humanity to choose. And as the crew braced themselves, hearts pounding, lungs burning, the leader finally drew in one last shaking breath. The darkness surged upward. The darkness surged upward, swallowing light as if the planet itself exhaled pure shadow. The crew staggered back, choking on the heat and dust, weapons raised though they all knew it was useless. The alien clung to the medic's arm, its body trembling, its voice breaking into frantic words that carried nothing but fear. Then the chamber lights exploded all at once, plunging everything into flickering half-darkness. For a heartbeat only the roar filled the air. But then, through the storm of sound and chaos, something else broke through, another signal. It was faint at first, layered over the roar like a whisper inside a hurricane. The crew's earpieces crackled, their comms flickering with bursts of data that none of them recognized. Not from Earth. Not from the aliens they had just awakened. This was something new, something hidden beneath the noise. The leader's eyes widened. It's not just the planet. Something's broadcasting, now. The medic stared at him, dust clinging to her hair and face. From where? Who else is here? The answer came not from him but from the alien. Its head snapped toward the ceiling, its wide eyes filled not just with fear now, but with recognition. It knew this signal. It mouthed a single word, broken but unmistakable. Hunter. The ground convulsed with another quake, the fissure widening until half the chamber floor crumbled away. Below, through the shifting shadows, shapes moved. Not one but many. Massive forms twisting through the black, too fast and too fluid to belong to machines, too vast to be anything natural. Their movements carried intention. The medic's breath caught in her throat. There's more than one. The alien turned back to them, its body trembling violently, its hand striking its own chest again and again as though trying to drive its meaning into them. The word returned, broken but sharper now. Hunter. The crew exchanged terrified looks. Whatever had destroyed the civilization wasn't just some mindless force of nature. It was alive, organized. Predators. And they were waking. The comms crackled again, louder this time, almost deafening. Words spilled through in fragments, distorted, ancient yet unmistakably deliberate. Not noise. Not chance. A language of command. A signal to rise. A call not for help but for war. The leader's stomach turned cold. They're not just waking up. They're coordinating. The alien screamed suddenly, pointing past the fissure toward the far wall. In the flickering light the crew saw new movement. Not shadows this time but machines, sleek insect-like constructs peeling themselves out of the rubble, their eyes burning with a dim red glow. They had been buried in the ruins, waiting for this moment. The crew fired instinctively, bolts of energy slicing through the dust. Some machines fell, sparking violently, but more crawled free, their claws skittering against the stone as they advanced in unison. The medic grabbed the alien, pulling it behind her. Her voice shook with fury and fear. We have to move now. But as the first wave of machines surged forward, the fissure roared again, and from below came the unmistakable sound of something much larger dragging itself upward. The leader felt his chest tighten. This was no simple rescue. This was a battlefield buried in silence for centuries, waiting for someone to stumble upon it. Humanity hadn't just awakened survivors, they had awakened enemies. And the most chilling thought of all struck him like ice. Maybe the signal they had followed hadn't been a cry for help. Maybe it had been bait. The alien's grip on his sleeve tightened, its eyes shining with tears, its broken voice forcing out one more word. Just. The word echoed in his head, heavier than the roar, heavier than the quake. Humanity stood now at a threshold that could define not just the fate of this alien people, but their own. Save them and risk unleashing a predator on the galaxy. Leave them and betray everything that made humanity human. The machines screeched, red eyes multiplying in the dust. The ground split further, and from the abyss a shape began to rise, vast, armored, its silhouette blotting out what little light remained. The roar sharpened into a voice, not human, not alien, but something in between. Ancient. Triumphant. Words carved from the void itself. The crew couldn't understand the language, but they understood the intent. It wasn't simply waking. It was claiming. The chamber shook so violently that the walls cracked open, revealing hidden passages that spiraled into darkness. Alarms blared in a dozen unknown tones, machines shrieking as they poured from the shadows. The crew fought to hold their ground, firing into the chaos, every shot echoing with desperation. The alien clung tighter, its voice breaking with grief and fear, repeating the same word over and over, choice, choice, choice. The leader felt the weight of it pressing into his soul. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about saving a dying species anymore. This was about whether humanity itself had walked willingly into the jaws of something far older, something patient enough to wait until another species came close enough to hear its song. The fissure erupted, fire and smoke blasting upward. The massive figure below forced its way higher, clawed limbs tearing into stone. Its eyes glowed with a sickly light, its voice a thunder that rattled the ruins. The leader's breath caught, his hand trembling around his weapon. Humanity had come searching for life, for meaning, for proof they were not alone. And now, in this forgotten tomb, they had found it. But some things were lost to time for a reason. The alien looked at him one last time, its face streaked with tears, its voice a whisper carried only to him. He didn't know the language, but he felt it. The same word, the same plea, the same unbearable truth. And as the roar became a scream, the machines closed in, and the shadows surged upward from the abyss. Humanity's choice loomed closer than ever: save what was left, or be swallowed by what should never have been found. The roar filled the chamber until it felt as though the entire world was splitting apart. The fissure widened, fire and smoke pouring upward, and the colossal figure below dragged itself closer to the surface. Its glowing eyes burned with ancient hunger, reflecting against the fractured walls like twin suns rising in a place that had forgotten light. The crew fired desperately at the machines spilling from the rubble. Sparks and shrieks echoed in the chaos, but for every construct they destroyed, more crawled out from hidden recesses, as if the ruins themselves had been nothing but a hive waiting to awaken. Dust choked the air, screams cut through the roar, and still the alien clung to the medic, its voice breaking on that single word it had been repeating all along: choice. The leader's chest ached with the weight of it. They hadn't crossed a galaxy to be soldiers. They had come as explorers, as saviors. And yet here, at the edge of extinction, survival pressed on him like a blade at his throat. He looked around at his people, exhausted, terrified, fighting with every last ounce of strength. He looked at the alien, trembling, begging. He looked at the abyss, where something vast and merciless clawed its way toward them. The choice could no longer be avoided. The leader made the call. His voice cut through the chaos, sharp, unshakable. We save them. Everyone we can. We don't leave them to die again. The words were madness. The machines pressed in closer. The creature below rose higher. But something in his voice steadied the crew. Humanity had always been reckless, but it had also always been relentless. If death waited for them, then they would meet it with empty hands only after they had given everything they could. The medic rushed to the chambers, slamming her tools into alien consoles, forcing them to respond. Panels burst, sparks shot out, but glass hissed open one by one. Fragile figures collapsed into her arms, coughing, gasping, alive. Other crew members joined her, dragging the survivors away from the failing systems, shielding them as the machines closed in. The first of the Great Hunter finally emerged from the fissure. Its body was monstrous, its armor a lattice of bone and metal fused together, its claws big enough to crush walls. It let out a scream that rattled their very bones, a sound that spoke of triumph, of hunger, of endless patience rewarded. The alien survivors whimpered, collapsing to the floor, shielding their faces as if the sound alone was enough to tear their souls apart. The leader raised his weapon, knowing it was pointless, and fired anyway. The blast struck the creature's chest and burned a hole in its hide, but the wound closed almost instantly, flesh knitting together as if mocking the attempt. Fear clawed at him, but he held his ground. Humanity had always fought impossible battles, and this would be no different. The alien they had freed first pulled itself upright, its frail body trembling but its eyes filled with sudden fire. It pointed to the consoles, shouting in broken words, its voice ragged but fierce. The medic caught it instantly. These machines weren't only for preservation. They were tied to the planet itself. Power. Control. A weapon hidden in plain sight. The crew surged to the consoles. Their hands shook as they jammed human tech into alien systems, forcing connections where none were meant to exist. The ruins shuddered violently as if the entire world resisted them, but then, beneath the roar, beneath the shrieks of the hunters, a low hum filled the chamber. The walls lit up. Lines of energy carved themselves into the stone, racing upward and outward like veins of fire. Above, the ground split wider as towers of long-buried machinery rose from the ruins, unfolding after centuries of silence. The planet was not just a grave. It was a weapon built from desperation, a last act of defiance from a people who had refused to die quietly. The hunters roared in rage as the machines they had once silenced began to awaken again. The leader shouted for his crew to hold the line. The medic screamed for more time. The alien survivors cried out in fear and hope all at once. The great hunter lunged forward, its claws smashing into the chamber, scattering stone and bodies alike. The leader dove aside, dragging one of the younger crew out from beneath falling debris. Pain shot through his body, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to stop. The medic slammed a final connection into the console. The hum became a scream of power. Energy surged through the ruins, blasting upward in waves of light that shattered the dust-filled air. Towers on the surface ignited, sending beams of brilliance into the sky, piercing through the planet's broken atmosphere. The colossal hunter froze, its eyes widening in sudden recognition, not fear but fury. The planet itself had turned against it. The ground heaved violently as the systems reached their peak. Light erupted from the fissures, searing heat exploding outward, consuming machines by the dozens. The alien survivors clung to the crew, sobbing, as the ancient weapon buried in their world came alive one last time. The leader staggered to his feet, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the vast creature before him. Humanity had not come to this place for war, but now war had found them. And yet in this moment they were not just humans. They were the voice of a species that refused to let silence have the last word. The fissure erupted in a blinding explosion. The hunter shrieked, its body engulfed in the light, its form tearing apart under the sheer force of the planet's vengeance. The smaller machines were obliterated instantly, torn apart in waves of fire and lightning. The ruins trembled, stone collapsing as if the planet was finally letting go of its last breath. The crew shielded the survivors as the chamber came down around them. Dust and heat smothered the air. The roar of the dying hunter shook the world to its core, then faded into silence. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of their own ragged breathing. The ruins were broken, the fissure sealed in molten stone, the ancient predators silenced. Against all odds, against time itself, they had survived. The medic knelt by the alien, who stared at her with eyes full of tears and relief. It reached for her hand, its broken voice whispering words that needed no translation. Gratitude. The leader looked at his crew, battered, bloodied, alive. They had saved what they could. They had fought back the dark. Humanity had kept its promise, to never turn away. And yet, the silence was not complete. The comms crackled again. Not with the hunters this time, but with something else. A signal, faint but deliberate. It wasn't coming from the ruins. It wasn't coming from the planet. It was coming from the stars above. The alien froze, its expression shifting from relief to dread. Slowly, it raised its hand toward the sky, whispering a single broken word. More. The leader's blood turned cold. The hunters had not been bound to this world alone. They had only been sleeping here. And if one world had been a battlefield, how many others were out there, waiting for humanity to stumble into their silence? The survivors clung to them, looking at humanity with desperate hope. The ruins burned. The planet groaned. And above, in the endless dark, new signals stirred. The conflict here was over. But the true war had only just begun. The silence after the storm was heavier than the chaos itself. The ship that had once hung in the sky like a wound in the stars was gone, leaving only a faint shimmer in the atmosphere where its vast bulk had burned its exit. Humanity stood among ruins, but they were ruins of survival, not defeat. The people who had endured it, farmers, scientists, children who had known nothing but fear until now, felt the weight of what they had done. They had faced something lost to time, something that should have never been found again, and somehow, through courage and unity, they had saved not just themselves but the remnants of a species that had been on the brink of disappearing forever. But survival did not erase the scars. The landscape bore deep burns, craters where light had split the earth, shattered towers leaning as though caught mid-fall. The air still smelled faintly of ozone and scorched metal. Yet in the middle of that ruin, people gathered, huddled together, leaning on one another not because they had to but because they wanted to. Their faces told the story more than words could. Fear, exhaustion, and above all, hope. What no one could ignore was the presence of those who had come before. The ancient figures, the ones awakened from a time long buried, had not left with the ship. They stood silently among the humans, their tall, graceful forms casting strange shadows in the morning light. Their eyes were older than memory, yet when they looked at the survivors, there was something new in them, something soft. They had been forgotten by time, left to fade into nothing, and now they were alive again because of humanity's stubbornness, because humanity refused to bow down even when the universe demanded it. One of the elders raised a hand, trembling not from weakness but from something deeper, an emotion almost impossible to name. Gratitude. Regret. The crowd quieted. Everyone waited for a voice, for a word to explain what came next. But none came. Only silence. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning, as though everything had already been said in the shared struggle of survival. The younger among the ancient ones stepped forward. Their voice, when it came, was low, uncertain. We should have perished long ago. Time took us as it takes all things. Yet you, Their gaze swept across the crowd of scarred but living humans. You gave us another chance. You fought not just for yourselves but for those you did not know, for lives that were not your own. We did not expect such defiance, such compassion. People shifted uneasily, because compassion had not been the word they would have chosen. It hadn't felt compassionate, standing against a force that threatened to tear the sky apart. It had felt like desperation, like doing what had to be done simply to survive another moment. But hearing it spoken that way lit something in their hearts. A child tugged at their mother's sleeve and whispered, "Does this mean it's over?" The question was small, almost swallowed by the breeze, but it carried through the silence. The mother's eyes filled and she knelt, pulling her child close. "For now," she said softly. "For now it's over." But everyone knew it was not truly the end. The world had been cracked open. Something lost to time had returned, and it had been saved not by fate or by chance but by the will of humanity. That truth would ripple out into the stars. Others would hear. Other eyes would turn toward Earth. The ancient ones, for their part, moved quietly through this reborn world. Some helped rebuild, their knowledge of forgotten crafts strange yet useful. Others stood apart, staring at the sky as though searching for something no one else could see. They seemed burdened, as if being saved had cost them more than being forgotten. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the ruins gold, one of the elders approached a group of humans resting after the day's labor. Their voice was quiet, fragile. "We do not know what to offer in return," they said. "What we once were is gone. What remains of us belongs to you if you will have it." The response was simple. "You don't owe us anything. We didn't do it for a reward." Those words lingered in the air like an anchor. The humans had not done it for power or for knowledge or even for hope of safety. They had done it because it was right. Because even against something vast, ancient, and terrifying, they refused to turn away. That was humanity's strength. Not its weapons, not its machines, but its refusal to give up on life. Any life. As days turned to weeks, whispers spread beyond the ruins. Messages carried through fractured satellites and broken relays, traveling to distant colonies and stations. The story grew, of an ancient power that had risen and a species, fragile and small in the galactic scale, that had stood unflinching before it. Those who heard it struggled to believe, but the evidence was there, the scars on the earth, the fragments of a ship that should not have existed. And so the legend began, lost to time, saved by humanity. In quiet moments, some wondered if it was a blessing or a curse. By saving what was lost, had they invited something greater, something still waiting in the shadows of the universe? Yet even that fear did not dim the truth they now carried. They had faced the unthinkable and they had not broken. The final night before the survivors dispersed to rebuild in new places, a fire was lit in the heart of the ruins. People gathered around it, faces warm in the glow, voices soft with songs and stories. One of the ancient ones sat among them, their eyes reflecting the firelight. For the first time a smile touched their lips. "Your kind," they said, "is unlike any we have ever known. You do not cling to the past, nor do you surrender to it. You make something new. Perhaps that is why time could not take you, why even in the face of death you endure." The fire cracked, sending sparks into the night. People leaned closer to one another, feeling a weight lift. The child from before sat curled in their mother's lap, eyes heavy with sleep. "What happens tomorrow?" they asked. The mother kissed their hair, watching the flames. "Tomorrow we begin again." And that was the truth of it. The story was not one of endings but of beginnings. Humanity had saved something lost to time, but in doing so they had discovered themselves. They were small, fragile, fleeting compared to the stars, yet they carried something greater than any weapon, any machine. They carried the will to fight for one another, the courage to stand when all else fell. The world would remember this. The stars would remember. And though the scars would never fade, neither would the light of what had been done. Humanity had faced the impossible and endured. And somewhere in the silence beyond the stars, something stirred, watching, waiting. But for now Earth was quiet. For now they had won.